During the pandemic, they trapped over 4 million people for over 2 years here in the country, even after it was medically proven that people that were vaccinated could get and transmit COVID the same as the unvaccinated. So we had 90% of people who were vaccinated who were allowed to go wherever they wanted and enter and leave. But we trapped those 10% that were not a higher risk in the country, separating them from their families and causing a lot of trauma. So then we get to the Emergency Measures Act. The Emergency Measures Act was ruled by the courts to be illegal. Now, I'm not sure why there's no consequences for that. If I got convicted of something, I could appeal, but I would have to appeal from prison.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Now, for those that are watching at home, they want to know, why are we here? How did we get here? So it all started with Sustainable Development Technology Canada. That is a fund that was designed to support initiatives for green technology, emissions reduction, things like that. And the fund started in 2001, and under Liberal and Conservative governments went along just fine until this corrupt bunch of Liberals got involved. And so what happened was Cabinet decided to give $1 billion to the fund, and they picked their friends to be on the committee to decide who was going to get the money, and the friends gave the money to their own businesses. The Auditor General found 186 conflicts of interest. 80% of the projects were conflicts of interest. And there was a whistleblower within the Sustainable Development Technology Canada department that said that there was criminal activity involved. And so as parliamentarians, we wanted to look into the matter. And so the documents related to this fund were requested in June of this year. But the government, the Liberals did what they normally do, delay, and then when they sent the documents, they blacked out all the useful parts. And so the member for Regina Chappelle stood up on a point of privilege because as parliamentarians, it is our right to get whatever documents that we need to do our good work. And you, Speaker, absolutely correctly ruled that yes, it was a violation of our privilege, and you ordered the Liberals to deliver the documents unredacted so that we can turn them over to the RCMP. And so we've been waiting 3 weeks, debating about this point of privilege every day, and no documents. So that's why we're here. I'm going to spend my time today talking and pushing back against the very weak arguments that the Liberals are bringing about why they can't bring the documents forward. And I'm going to start with one of the myths that they are spreading. They are saying that they can't produce the papers because to give them to the RCMP would violate the charter rights of Canadians. This is not true at all. The police and the RCMP get tips all the time. Crime Stoppers, phone calls alleging criminal activity, documents alleging criminal activity. And what the law says is that the RCMP has a due diligence to look at the evidence presented, and if they find evidence of criminality, then they have to go to the court and order those documents through the court in order for them to be used at a trial. That is the law. So it is ridiculous to suggest that they can't produce the papers for that reason. The other thing I would say is that it's very hypocritical of the Liberals to say that they're concerned about the charter rights of Canadians, because they have violated nearly every charter right of Canadians. You are what your record says you are. So let's look at their record. First, let's start with freedom of expression, with Bill C-11, the censorship bill, where the government-appointed CRTC can take down an individual's content if they find it objectionable. Then let's talk about C-63, which is the online harms bill that will put you in jail for life if they think you may commit a hate crime in the future. Utterly chill on freedom of expression. And then let's talk about freedom of religion. We've got people crying death to Jews from coast to coast to coast. This government has done nothing to stem the flow of the vandalism and the harassment that's happening at synagogues and at Jewish businesses in our country. The Hindus are being persecuted by the Khalistanis. Again, they've done nothing. 112 Christian churches burned. They've said nothing. And so there is no protection for freedom of religion from this Liberal government. Then, if we want to go down the list of other freedoms, let's talk about mobility rights. Okay? Every Canadian has the right to freely enter and leave Canada. That is in the Charter of Rights. During the pandemic, they trapped over 4 million people for over 2 years here in the country, even after it was medically proven that people that were vaccinated could get and transmit COVID the same as the unvaccinated. So we had 90% of people who were vaccinated who were allowed to go wherever they wanted and enter and leave. But we trapped those 10% that were not a higher risk in the country, separating them from their families and causing a lot of trauma. So then we get to the Emergency Measures Act. The Emergency Measures Act was ruled by the courts to be illegal. Now, I'm not sure why there's no consequences for that. If I got convicted of something, I could appeal, but I would have to appeal from prison. So I'm not sure why there's been no action on that. But they froze people's bank accounts. That's unlawful search and seizure. Another charter right that they violated. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to freedom of discrimination, you're not supposed to discriminate against anybody based on race, religion, age, etc. But we've seen that they do. The Canada Summer Jobs Program discriminated against people of faith that wouldn't sign the attestation. And we know that they discriminated against age when they decided to give an OAS raise to people over 75, but not between 65 and 75. The Liberals have claimed, well, there needs to be more separation between Parliament and the RCMP. And certainly I agree there should be separation. The job of the RCMP is to enforce the rule of law for everybody equally. And so I think you are what your record says you are. So why don't we look at the record of the relationship and the separation between the RCMP and this Liberal government? Let's start with the Billionaire Island fiasco. You may remember that the Prime Minister wasted $215,000 worth of taxpayer money, and it was alleged that if he didn't give himself written permission, it was actually fraud. The internal RCMP documents showed that the force considered opening a fraud investigation after details of the trip came to light, but they cited numerous reasons why it did not, including the fact that neither Parliament nor the Ethics Commissioner chose to refer the case to the police. So you can see from that, first of all, that the RCMP do accept documents from Parliament, and you can also see from this that there was no evidence of whether or not the Prime Minister granted himself permission to go on this Billionaire Island trip. And if he did not, he definitely had committed fraud. They didn't even bother to investigate. Then let's talk about the SNC-Lavalin scandal. So we know that Jody Wilson-Raybould was clear with the Prime Minister and Elder Marquez that they absolutely could not talk to the prosecutor about getting SNC the deal to get them off the hook. So he kicked her to the curb, and then he put his buddy David Lametti in place. And oh, voila, the next thing you know, SNC-Lavalin has the agreement that they need to get off the hook. Well, did the RCMP investigate this thing? No, they did not. Until 4 years after the fact, after Brenda Lucki retired, they decided they were going to start investigating. And as soon as they announced that, interestingly, David Lametti was kicked out of cabinet and ended up stepping down as an MP. Then let's talk about the Brenda Lucki situation. So in the Nova Scotia massacre, it was clear that the RCMP was working on behalf of Parliament with the Liberal government. And I'm going to quote from a newspaper article, National Post. It says, in June, the Mass Casualty Commission revealed disputes between RCMP investigators in Nova Scotia and the Commissioner with allegations that Lucki let the politics interfere with the probe. Notes from the Mountie in charge of the massacre investigation said that on a conference call, Lucki expressed disappointment that the types of guns used by the killer had not been released to the public because she had promised the Prime Minister's office and the Public Safety Minister the guns would be detailed, tied to pending gun control legislation. Not a lot of separation there, Mr. Speaker. And then let's talk about the We Charity scandal. So Section 119(1) of the Criminal Code says that it is illegal for a holder of public office to take an action that benefits themselves or their family. And it is clear to everyone that the Prime Minister took an action by approving nearly $1 billion for the We Charity scandal. And we all know that his mother and his brother and his wife were getting paid by the We Charity to do speaking engagements. And the Prime Minister in BBC News said, "I made a mistake for not recusing myself from the discussions immediately, given my family's history." Well, he didn't make a mistake. He broke the law. But again, the RCMP did nothing. So, if we look at the history, we see that there's not enough separation and there needs to be more. Now, if we go on to the next thing, if there's nothing to see, they're claiming there's really nothing to see. Well, a whistleblower said there was criminal activity. And so at least we should get the documents that the Speaker correctly ordered, and we should get to work on that. Right. But it's a pattern of corruption. So we've seen that with this government from the beginning. When I got elected in 2015, there's been a history of not just corruption at the Prime Minister's level, but throughout the Liberal Party. If you would recall, Raj Grewal, a former MP, who was charged with fraud. Joe Pesky-Solito, former Liberal MP. His company was involved and charged with the money laundering scam. Sexual misconduct with Hunter Tutu and Darshan Khan. The clam scam, where the Minister of Public Safety currently gave his relative a $25 million clam quota and to a company that didn't even own a boat. Terrible. The Minister of Transportation gave money to her husband's company. It's a total conflict of interest. And so the government is showing that they have this pattern of behavior, and whenever they're caught, then they do the obvious, they delay, and they refuse to release documents, or they release them all redacted. That needs to stop. Canadians have a right to know what happened to the $400 million and to get to the bottom of it. Now, the good news is that while we continue to debate the parliamentary privilege part of this situation, no government bills can come forward. So the awful legislation that the Liberals are trying to bring forward isn't going to happen. So, for example, Bill C-63, that would put you in jail for life if they think you might commit a hate crime in the future, is not going to come forward. And Bill C-71, that would take the children of Canadian citizens that live abroad, children that have never lived in Canada, and grant them Canadian citizenship. And when they turn 18, they'd be able to vote and decide on their honor where they want their vote to count. That is a new level of foreign interference. So I'm happy that one's not coming forward. And of course, we also won't see the bill that has the date of the election changed so that the MPs that are going to lose their seats get their pension. That won't be coming forward either. But it's an absolute disgrace to Canadians that money, $400 million, has basically been given out with 186 conflicts of interest. And, it's like nothing to see here. It's totally unacceptable. And I think that if the government wants to get back to work, they should do the right thing. They should produce the documents unredacted like the Speaker has requested. And is there quorum?
I'd like to thank the honourable member for having raised the question. There does not appear to be quorum at the moment. So we will verify and ring the bells if necessary. I see that honourable members are coming into the House. I hear the confirmation from the table that we do have quorum. The honourable member has 5 minutes remaining in her speech.
And so when it comes to this green slush fund, I think one of the most disturbing things about it, to me, is that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change was part of the cabinet that approved the money for the green slush fund. He was part of the cabinet that chose the committee members of this, that were going to decide who got the money. And the committee members gave the money to a company called Cycle that he is a stakeholder in. So once again, Criminal Code Section 119(1), no holder of public office can take an action that benefits themselves or their family. And I would argue that this is another example that should be looked into by the RCMP. Now, that said, how do we get the Canadians' money back? Many of the companies that were awarded money were not even doing something to reduce emissions or introduce green technology. And so, this was a fund that existed since 2001 and never had any problems until this Liberal government got involved. And so, it makes you wonder about other funds that they're managing and whether the same level of corruption is happening. Because the Auditor General said 80% of the projects had a conflict of interest. This is simply unacceptable, and I think that we need to get to the bottom of it. And so my hope is that we are going to see these documents produced in due time. It shouldn't take long because the documents already exist. The Auditor General audited them. And so they should be able to be produced, and we should give them to the RCMP, because knowing where to look for criminal activity is going to be key. And the RCMP has the right, the Liberals have argued they have the right to request documents, but they don't know which ones they want. So that's why we've asked for all of the ones that are related to the slush fund, so that we can give them all the information they need. They can look through it. If they do see evidence of criminal activity, they will then go to the court, formally order the documents so that they can be used in a criminal prosecution. And that is the way things are supposed to work. Now, the other arguments that we've heard from the Liberals have been, really very weak. And it's the same thing every time that there is a problem with documents. They say, well, we want to send this to committee. That's what the motion is all about. Well, no, the motion is to produce the documents unredacted. Because if it goes to committee, what will happen is what always happens, We Charity scandal and all the other scandals I talked about. They will filibuster those meetings to keep the documents from coming forward, or they will work with their NDP partners to adjourn the debate. And that is the way things go. And that is why we don't get to the bottom of these scandals. And that is why these scandals keep occurring. And it's really unbelievable, the number of scandals that we have seen. Now, I think the sad part of freezing the Sustainable Development Technology Fund because of this scandal and the corruption, it's impacted people. It's impacted a company in my riding that was getting funding to make green battery technology. That's actually quite interesting technology. It's like portable. You can put it in your backpack and use it to charge things when, if you were in the military, out in a place where there's no power, all kinds of interesting things like that. They're called Illuma Power. But you know what? Now they're in the valley of death from a commercialization point of view because of the freezing of this fund. All relating back again to the corruption of this government, which needs to come to an end with a carbon tax election. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.